So I'm excited to be able to take a serious theme and approach it from what sounds like a funny angle, and I hope get someplace before the evening is over. Glad you guys are here. Ladies and gentlemen, let's explore the link between Hollywood, science, and the zombie apocalypse. Most of you think that this topic can't be spoken on. I can guarantee nobody has ever seen a title like this before. And I think that it will take us some places that are interesting, whether you come from the science side, the religion side, the climate change side, the zombie side, 3 of you are zombies, or none of the above. And so I think you can tell that I hope to have some fun with you as well as to go in some interesting places. Now, it might not at first be clear how zombies and climate change are related. But actually, if you're under 30, you already have a pretty good clue of how they are. If you're over 30, you won't understand this talk. Anyway, so if you are over 30, I need to tell you that we are in the midst of a zombie apocalypse craze. There's no milder way to put it. You know that apocalypse films go back for a long, long time. I mean, nobody here is probably old enough to know that in the 1950s, King Kong films were apocalyptic films. And there were little plastic models they'd build where King Kong would knock down the Empire State Building. You see this little model fall over on a, but it wasn't even, what was it? Was it 15 millimeter? They were pretty small, 16 millimeter films at that time. The first classic film is Apocalypse Now. There you go. It's the 1979 Vietnam War film directed by Francis Ford Coppola, starring Marlon Brando, Robert Duvall, and Martin Sheen. Really a brilliant film, and in some ways not launching the recent craze of apocalyptic films. Now, today, the zombie apocalypse and the post-apocalyptic films, and that's going to be the interesting topic tonight, are among the most significant cultural expressions. Why? Why are they important? Let's try to understand what they express about what it's like to live in today's world. And in that sense, I take the films very, very seriously. Plus, I worry that my kids will wake up at night and see zombies, especially since their door is, the twins, 13-year-olds, are covered with pictures of zombies, and so are the inside. And they don't have nightmares. I mean, I even look at the posters, I have nightmares all night long. All right, so let's try to see what this is. And so this is a funny zombie. This is the world after the zombies have come and begun to destroy it. There we go. So is anyone who's seeing a zombie for the first time? If you give us your street address, we can arrange that you'll see more. So what is the characteristic about zombies? They don't feel anything and they can't be killed, more or less, and we've got some exceptions. And we'll see why that makes them so dangerous. But they basically have to look creepy. My son does zombie runs, which is a California thing. I'm sure they don't do that in Oklahoma. And you have to run half a mile, and there's zombies coming out from behind trees. And it's actually like flag football. If you lose both flags, then you're out. If you have both flags, then you get a free Coke or something at the end. So this is extremely dangerous stuff. I just want you to know that I have a zombie runner in the family. All right. The hardest thing about zombie apocalypse is pretending I'm not excited. So it really is an exciting way to spend your time, right? So now what I want to do is give you some clips, a couple now and a couple further into the talk, so that you get some sense about zombie films. I apologize they're so short. In the first version of this talk, the clips lasted an hour and a half. Zach said I have 45 minutes, so that wasn't going to work. So in a sense, the most beautifully produced film is a music video, named Thriller by Michael Jackson. And what's being threatened? You have humans in a walled city, in a world that they've lost control of, trying to protect themselves with walls from this apocalypse, and failing. And they always fail in some way in the zombie films. And then down they come, and obviously they're all in trouble. Amazing. It gets worse. So we'll come back a little bit later to some other ones. Now, I can't show the clips, but I just want to pause and talk about I Am Legend. Really one of the legendary. This is a 2007 apocalyptic film starring Will Smith, obviously. So he's an army virologist, Robert Neville. And there is a sort of a virus that's wiped out most of humankind. How was the virus started? In an attempt to cure cancer. So over and over again in zombie films, there's a sense that something that humans tried to do to make stuff better failed. And then it caused this apocalyptic context. And so here, virtually the only human being left, in fact, at first, as far as he knows, the only, is Robert Neville. He's in New York City, and he's surrounded by the Dark Seekers. So he's alone, and their community. He's fighting off these attacks. He's killing them. He's taking them. He's doing vivisection, so he's killing them alive, right, to do his experimentation, to try to find an antidote. And as the film goes on, you begin to recognize that maybe he's not the hero, and maybe they're the heroes. I mean, you've got the zombie faces, you've got Will Smith's calm sort of presence. It's interesting, the actual ending, do you remember? He saves this mother and daughter, right? And then he puts them in a coal chute or something, and then he throws a grenade that kills him and the attacking creatures, and then they escape, they go up to Vermont, and they find a community, and so they're not alone again. Did you know there's an alternate ending where he's doing vivisection? It wasn't shown, but it was in the original manuscript. He is doing vivisection on this female, and a male, an alpha male, comes outside the glass and makes a smear in the shape of a butterfly, which is the same as the tattoo that she has on her arms. And he realizes that the male is trying to communicate that this is his partner. And so Legend stops, he stares at the alpha male, he apologizes to the Dark Seekers. And then there's a scene where his apology is accepted by the alpha male, and he's shocked. He sits down for a moment in his laboratory, and he realizes that he hasn't recognized that they are feeling, sentient, compassionate beings, and that he's been the subhuman. And then he goes with the mother and daughter, and they find the others. Two different stories. In the one case, he's a hero. In the other case, he knows that he was wrong the whole time. I mean, there's scenes where he just goes out and kills bunches of them, right? Sort of suicidal, you remember? Suicidal themes where he walks in. God didn't do this, we did, is a line from there. God didn't do this either, we did. The subtext says, man's footprint on the planet today. And just like Legend, we sometimes wonder, would the world be better without us? Are we Robert Neville to this planet? That's a point of intersection. It's sort of self-questioning that's a part of the zombie literature. Self-questioning on the part of the humans. I'll come back to that later. A beautiful transition to what we've done about the planet. I want to show you some science slides now. And I know from experience that people, except the scientists who love nerding out about this, the non-scientists, their eyes glaze over in about 4.54 minutes. And so I'll try to limit the science to 4.54 minutes. The data about climate change is disputed. That the temperature is rising is indisputable, but whether humans have a role is a political question in the United States. It turns out not to be a scientific question in any way. The numbers communicate. I actually think the numbers are important. The greatest predictor of the future of natural systems are the scientific models which are tested and predict the future of natural systems. That's what scientific models are designed for. They're not designed to answer metaphysical questions. They're not designed to prove whether God exists or doesn't exist. They're designed to find the models or the laws and predict what will happen to the future of systems when initial conditions are known. That's what science is good at. In fact, nothing that humans do is as good at predicting future states of natural systems than science. That's what it's invented for. It's what it's good at. If you're interested in that, you go into it, you can criticize other models until the experts agree on what are the best predictive models. We test them, and then we make projections. That's what science does the best. And the numbers are the way that we see what will be predicted or what has been successfully predicted and what is the likelihood. We can even say, how likely is it that this outcome will occur or not occur? Not something that a philosopher can do. We say, I have an argument. I like the argument. I'll give you my reasons, but I can't test it in most cases. If I can, it stops being philosophy and it starts being science. We need both, but what science does well are these predictions. Still, I find that the numbers alone are sometimes difficult. So climate change, this is the one that you're most familiar with. Some of the effects we may not see up close and personal. We have a number of organisms, animals that evolved over thousands or millions of years that are now extinct. That means that their particular genome, their resource for a changed planet is lost. You know, when there's a change in climate or forestation or temperature, then an animal that might have been in a small niche in the environment gains greater capacity to thrive in that environment, and it can move into an environment where the old species have died off because of the change. To lose biodiversity is to lose chances for the future of life on this planet. The range of genomes, the range of different answers to environmental questions is crucial for the success, our success, living things success in the future. When they're gone, they're gone. The end of that evolutionary change. Irreversible changes to ecosystems and animals. You know, in particular, the shrinking of the glaciers. This is Mount Schrankogel in Austria, where people measure where the glaciers were and have receded to now. In California, for example, the way to keep water for, you know, LA is in trouble, is the mountains, the snow, and that becomes the water reservoir for this densely populated state. You don't have the water reservoirs in the mountains, in snow. There's no way to keep the rivers won't be enough water for the people to live off of. Zach just told me the Colorado River no longer even makes it to Mexico as of 10 years ago. Is that what you told me? Okay, for a long time, because the water is siphoned off for the golf courses in Phoenix, which of course is very important that you have green golf courses, even if Mexican farmers can't farm food unless you need the food, in which case you're in trouble. Change in the seasons, we could talk about that in detail, where the birds that migrate, for example, from northern Africa to Holland arrive just at the time that the trees blossom and the bugs come to eat the blossoms. And this ecosystem has evolved so that the birds can migrate, get filled when they're exhausted from the long flight, and then be able to have their offspring. But with the warming now, the blossoms come, then the birds arrive, the bugs come, and they have died off or left by the time the birds arrive, which means they're not able to get subsistence and not able to give birth. You can see how interlocking systems, you change one feature and all the other features. There are islands that are now being evacuated because they are becoming now uninhabitable compared to what they once were. Drought is huge. I talked to a hydrologist in northern India, Utter Padrash, who said that the water table is almost exhausted. And this is the home of millions and millions of people who depend upon that water and are in danger of losing that source. Water crisis in many, many areas of the planet. Actually, I understand that Zimbabwe is the richest source for food. It's the breadbasket in southern Africa. Because of El Nino, that produces drought in sub-Saharan and now more than before, Eastern Africa and Southern Africa, which means the crops are failing in a huge portion of Africa. Zimbabwe fed most of Southern Africa, and now the crops have failed. The water shortage is huge. By the year 2025, 2/3 of the world's population could be facing serious problems with water availability. This is not my photo, but something I saw in Bombay, where the children will be down there where raw sewage comes from the tenements, and that's the place that they play. The slums north of Bombay are the largest in the world. They go on for miles. This is one of the most polluted seas in China, the Bohai Sea. The children fish and take the fish home for the families to live off of. Industrial pollution from being poured directly into the sea. Carbon emissions is clear to you. Its role in cities. Population growth is something that we don't talk about as much now, but look at that chart. The growth, gradual, 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 and then shooting up, right, in this range. Here's 2007. Here's the projected at 2050. All right, that raises not only frightening data and frightening predictions for the future, but clearly some justice issues. Who are the main, well, look at the difference between the haves and the have-nots. I always think that that's worth remembering. What's the difference in miles per gallon between these two cars? 7 miles a gallon, is it 53 now for our little car? And then the mansions of Southern California that surround us. Single-family dwellings, in case you weren't sure, right? The inequities are clear from those photos, but amazing data. So how do we respond? What do we need to do, and what are we doing? I love the quote from Carnegie Mellon. We correctly reacted to counterterrorism with research and development, yet on energy and climate change, we're effectively just muddling through, Konstantin Samaras says. Oops. And Justin Harris in the New York Times last year, this report that $400 billion a year is being spent around the world to reduce emissions or otherwise cope with climate change. That sum is smaller than the revenue of a single American oil company, ExxonMobil. Smaller than the revenue in a given year is the total amount being spent on research to reduce emissions or cope with climate change. So you think, do you see the discrepancy? Right here, this major change, and then you have a lack of investment or attention being paid to it. What was that bump? So, how should we respond? What can we do? And what might motivate us to do it? I think that's one of the major questions to ask. The key question is the scientific facts, though they're accurate, don't seem to motivate people to do something different. And when I give this talk, people are depressed. And people say, well, it looks like we're facing a sort of, what? Apocalyptic response. And there we go again with the zombies. So let me go back to the zombies and then try to answer that third question in the time that remains. What's really interesting about the zombie films, it shows you two things. Humans dealing with a radically changed world, a radically changed planet, which is similar to what we just looked at as we looked at the scientific predictions. And on the other hand, it shows you what humans do when they travel, when they face a challenge. What are the two things you see? Incredible heroism, incredible care, incredible responses to each other to save lives and work together, right? And humans' ability to fight, to argue, and time again, right, the arguments turn violent. In other words, you see in this film the changed world and the two major responses of human beings to it. The response of altruism, of care, and the response of selfishness. I think that's why Walking Dead is such a brilliant film, and why it deserves our attention, is it shows us ourselves as in a mirror, and the zombies become the ability to raise that question and see it graphically, the threat that we face and how we respond. That's what's fascinating about the film. Walking Dead connects to what we are calling the global climate apocalypse. It affects everything. Lifestyles have to change. We can't be safe in our cities when they're no longer sustainable with changed climate and agriculture. We go back to farming and scavenging. We can't, the people in the film and we can't live after the change in a consumerist society anymore with services being delivered to us. We have to reevaluate how we live on this planet, how we come up with materials and goods to continue. The analogy is almost perfect. And I want to close the zombie segment with a clip from 28 Days Later. Anyone know that film? Okay, good. Now, we got all the zombie aficionados from the whole university. All 13 of you are here. So in this case, the scientists were trying to make an inhibitor that would get rid of violence and aggression. And they were doing these animal experiments, but then some activists let out a monkey who was a part of these experiments. And the inhibitor went wrong. And what happens is it actually promoted rage rather than stopping it. So the monkey bites one of the activists, and this disease spreads across England. It's sort of like rabies. It spread through the blood. So we have these four protagonists again, and they're trying to travel together to a safe space. The short clip I've chosen is when they meet up with some military guys, and these guys are willing, they're a bunch of bad people in this film, right? And the military guys are willing to do anything to survive, like many of the others in the film. They're dangerous. It shows humans are dangerous. We tried to change things to make them better, and it backfires. We end up having the opposite effect of what we would want. So in this scene, they've met up with the soldiers. The speaker is one of the soldiers. And the others have just said they'll do anything to survive. The leaders just said that all these soldiers, they can keep the women as sex slaves. So basically, human rights are gone. You can be as selfish as you want because of what's happening in the world. So let's watch what they say. Like sleeping flowers, for this, for everything, we are out of tune. It moves us not. You have a sense of a species just racing faster and faster down the freeways and out of tune for the world that surrounds us. It moves us not. What happens if we continue in that direction? So we have the science. Now I want to talk about not the science that gives us the knowledge, but our experience of the natural world. Is it true that it moves us not? The date was Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1968. Apollo 8, the first manned spacecraft to orbit the moon, came around the moon and saw for the first time any human being had ever seen an Earthrise. The first time in the history of our species. Friends, what's so significant about this photo? What does it tell us? Why has it become an icon since 1968? It's our planet. It's the only one. This photo transitions from the science, from the data and the models and the predictions, to our experience of the world that science describes. And here, I suggest, is the point of intersection between the science and the religion, between climate change and what apocalypse might mean. Carl Sagan said it best in his book, Pale Blue Dot. He gave a famous, he was the first host of Cosmos before Neil deGrasse Tyson. He recorded a response to a picture from Voyager as it moved away from the Earth and looked back on the Earth. Something that starts with science. This is the Science Literacy Project, and yet moves from it, without leaving it, toward the question of our experience. It's the only home that we have. That's what's at stake, I think, in the science and religion discussion. To find a border, an area of connection that doesn't need to leave science behind, but transitions to the question of who are we, where do we live, what are the values we need to live by. The climate change question is crucial because it is of necessity that point where the two dimensions meet. Our empirical knowledge of the world and the questions, the search for meaning we have as we seek to preserve our own home. That, I think, takes us to the question of religion. I love, again, that quote from Robert Neville in the legend film, "God didn't do this, we did." When tempted, nobody should say, God did the tempting. It was us. Now, religion has multiple responses to apocalypse, as you probably know. Apocalypse is a notion deep out of religion, and often it means the total destruction, the end of all things. So you have pictures in religious literature very close to the pictures that we saw at the beginning in the zombie apocalyptic pictures. The destruction of all things, right? The remainder of almost nothing from what civilization was. But what's the first tendency that religion has in responding to that? Is to pull humans, the chosen ones, out of the context. So have you ever heard of a notion, probably in Oklahoma nobody has, it's called the rapture? Probably that's new to your ears, but I'm assuming you guys are all scientists and you don't know. So the rapture is the idea that at some point God comes again, or the angels and the clouds come, and I don't know if you can see them, but all the good folks, the chosen here, are rising up, and all the innocent people unfortunately die. But that's fine because they're going to be raptured. So we're going to be okay, right? And we have these different views of how that takes place. And the world is going to go to hell in a handbasket, but, if you're chosen, you'll make it. Now, I'm thinking that notion of apocalypse, first of all, it doesn't synthesize well with the zombie apocalypse. Let me just say that, right? That's a real reason. No, that notion of apocalypse is not going to be very helpful as we ask, how could religion and science partner to help us make the response that we need to make? I was at the World Parliament of Religions in 2008 in Australia. We had the chance to do 3 sessions on science, on the religious traditions, and on the climate. At that time, we had about 600 people in a room. We opened the session with a Nobel Prize winner, actually in medicine, and he gave this talk on climate change. And then, I guess I can walk in front of the image here. I don't think, since it's 1950, they probably won't arrest me for it. So he came to the front of the stage like this. And he said, I've shown these slides all over the world to try to give people a sense of what the data is and where we're heading. He said, nobody seems to listen. And I remember he came to the front of the stage, he looked out over these hundreds of religious leaders representing every religion of the world. And he said, I'm not religious in any way, but you are religious leaders. And religions are about changing hearts, changing lives, changing the way people live, living more compassionately with each other. He said, please, would you work with me? My science friends and I can give you data. You can change hearts and lifestyles. If we could partner in this, we could make a difference. It was an impassioned plea by a brilliant, again, Nobel Prize winner in medicine, and that stuck with me since that moment. Do you understand what it's saying? He says, as a scientist, I can't do it. I can give you the numbers, and after 5, 7 minutes, you just tune out. You guys can change hearts, but you're not paying attention to the data. If we could just link that, we could really do something. What I want to say in closing is how this notion of apocalypse in religion and in science, we face a scientific apocalypse. That's basically what the data are saying. Do you understand that? And religion has had the notion of apocalypse for centuries. Could we bring those together in a positive way? Could we respond differently to the notion of apocalypse? What can religion add? I want to suggest 4 different ways of understanding religion. Religion is about the ultimately real. When religious people believe something about God or about the end of the world, they believe something that's more real than the things we see around us. Fair? Religion is about another world. It's about a hope after death, a place of heaven, the New Jerusalem, golden streets, a place, as it says, where there will be no more tears, and perhaps also a place where people will be punished. Now, to write about another world has positive features. It gives us hope, and it can be a place where justice is brought about. Because on this planet, we know there's a ton of injustice. But speaking of another world also has the danger of what? Of causing us not to think about this particular world. It's said that at the beginning of the Reagan administration, there were certain advisors to the president who believed that Christ would come back during the Reagan presidency. To my knowledge, it didn't happen. And so they said, they made recommendations of what should be spent on various policies. They said, don't worry about trying to save the forests, because that is a long-term problem, and the second coming will have happened in that amount of time. So let the forests die, because that's not a priority, given what we believe about religion. Now, that may or may not be true, but what is true is that that would be an example of focusing on another religion so that the world around us seems not to matter. Religion, however, equally true, is also about imagining a better world. A world better than this one. And religion is also about how we live here and now. At its best, religion can cause people to live above and beyond the short-sighted values, the selfishness, the hate, the in-group, out-group dynamics that are a part of human existence in the world. At its best, it has the capacity to raise us above ourselves. I think that's true of Christianity at its best. It's true of many of the major world religions. Lifting our eyes from the tragedies and the violence of each other and calling us toward something better. You've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. I say to you, if a man asks for your cloak, give him your shirt as well. If he asks you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor. But I say, love your enemy and do good to those who wrong you. Do you understand? Those are values from the Sermon on the Mount that call people above the cycle of revenge and damage to each other. Those are something that's offered by religions, a role that they can play. I need to close. In humanity, there are these two sides. There's the side that lifts us above ourselves, as we see in the zombie films, and the side of increasing violence. There's an incredible recent novel, soon to be a film, called The Age of Miracles. Has anyone read that book? One of the most fantastic recent books, won a bunch of prizes. It's about an 11-year-old girl named Julia living with her friend in a suburb in Southern California. And one day she wakes up and her parents are glued to the TV set. And it turns out that dawn has come 3 minutes later that morning than it was supposed to. And everyone's trying to figure out what happens. And all through the day, folks around the world are glued to their TV sets. The next morning, it's delayed now, but not by 3, but by 4 minutes. And it's this beautiful parallel story about the world slowing and slowing day by day so that consequences start happening. Birds can't fly and the birds start dying. The crops start dying. The clock is all off, so you go to school later and later, or it's longer and longer. And finally, they decide, the government just says, we're going to stick with the 24-hour time, no matter whether day or night. So the kids are going to school in the middle of the nighttime now. And then there's a group, what were they called, the real-timers, who decide they're going to live by the sun setting and rising and not by the time of clocks that the government says. So now you have these two groups. What do you think happens? The minority who are living on the old time get persecuted by the majority who are living on clock time. And it gets worse and worse. But what happens in Julia's life is an 11-year-old trying to form a first friendship, having a first boyfriend, struggling with differences of wealth and meaning. And they'll go down to the ocean where the rich houses are now covered with the waves of the oceans. You know, all the experiences of human being coming alive in the world. That's what youth is. That's what a human person is, to have that sense of life, of newness, of discovery against the backdrop of a world that in the Age of Miracles is slowing and slowing toward, in this case, the extermination of the human species. Do you understand those two lines? the inexorable results of what we do, which is what science studies, and the hope that springs eternal in the human breast. I want to close with an understanding of apocalypse drawn from the most positive side of religion that I think can be used constructively. Call it the three faces of apocalypse. There's the classic apocalyptic thought, destruction of everything, like I showed you in the pictures. There's post-apocalyptic thought, we'll get rid of the whole idea. And then more recently, theologians are talking about counter-apocalyptic, which basically brings the notion of apocalypse back down to where we are here and now. A Christian theologian named Catherine Keller asks, where is the source of hope? And she says, in the backdrop of a world in trouble, the play of hope is like a shifting luminosity at the edge of the present. Hope is that thing that draws us to make the right decisions, to leave the world a better place for our children and not a worse place. Apocalyptic is not about the end and the rapture. It's an embodied habit in which we find ourselves. Apocalyptic is a way of living here and now in the world with a realization of what it is, but like Julia, with those human hopes and loves and discoveries that are a part of our being. And finally, the Methodist theologian Rebecca Chopp asks us to think not just of cosmic time, but let that mean for us the temporality of all our relations. We're constantly changing on a globe that's constantly changing. Those are the ceaseless rhythms of natural time. So let's not see it as a progress toward a terrible end, not a cause from the very beginning, but as an endless flow of connections. And as we are connected with all other humans and all other living things, we get to act in such a way that that connectedness thrives instead of ending. So in conclusion, what's the decision? We listen to the science. We experience what it is to live on this planet. And we ask the question, will religion act moving away from science, moving away from the world, into a realm of hoped for hereafter? Or can we bring apocalyptic back down to earth as a way of thinking about how we live here in the present, based on values, creating hope for ourselves, for our offspring, and for the future? Thanks very much.